Welcome to part 16 in this series in creating a simple purchase order system using Blazor and C#. We've now reached the stage where we can add a new order and make changes to order lines in the process. But having saved the order, we cannot make further changes or even view it. In this video, we'll take the first steps in viewing and editing an order. If we run the application, we open up on the home page or the index page, and we can add a purchase order. I won't go through the process, but we can. But having added it, we can see it listed here in the purchase orders list, but we can't view it. So if I clicked edit, for example, nothing happens, or indeed I can't delete it either. So the first thing to do is to make this edit button do something. So let's close the application and have a look at that. So what we need to do is to, on this grid events, add a row select handler. And we'll be following exactly the same process as we had on the tax page, for example. Let's just have a quick look at that. Here we have grid events, row selected, row select handler, and down at the bottom we'll have a row select handler. So that's what it is for the tax page. On the index page we want something very similar, and I've got it ready to hand. So the row select handler looks at the PO object, and we have a variable called selected PO header ID, and this is getting the PO header ID from the row selected. So the next thing we need to do is declare that variable. So we'll put that near the top, and again I'll make it easy. So private integer selected PO header ID, and I'll default it to 0. And then lastly, well, almost lastly, I need to change the grid events to include the row select handler. So I've got a replacement one, and I'll get rid of the original. And so that will give us the ID of the row selected, but we also need to consider what happens if the user doesn't select a row, and this is the usual thing that we used on the tax page as well. Again, if we just take a quick look at the tax page, we can see that if the user doesn't select a row, we show a warning message, and it's this warning dialog or warning component that we've got up here. So I can just basically copy this. We'll copy the same logic that we used here onto the index page. So the first thing is to put in that component. Maybe I haven't got that there. We'll define it or declare it anyway. So that's the declaration, and in fact I can probably just copy it straight off here. And put it down here somewhere. So that should give us a warning if the user doesn't select a row. And having done that, we want to change the toolbar handler so that we cater for the edit. And for this, I've got some code here, so let's just bring that in. So if the selected PO header equals zero, i.e. the user hasn't selected one, we're going to issue a warning. Otherwise, we're going to open the purchase order page at the selected PO header ID. So let's just save that and run it. So let's just see what happens if I don't select a row. I get the warning saying please select an order from the grid, so that's good. And if I do select one, it opens the page, but the result is rather disappointing. We've got edit an order up here, but we haven't got any of the header information or any of the order lines. So let's take a look at what we need to do to correct that. The reason that we haven't got anything here is if we look at the data source, we can see that I'm looking on the wrong page now. On the purchase order page, the header uses a model called order add edit, and the order lines, the grid, uses order lines. And at the moment, when we initialize the form, we can see that if we've got, when we open the form, if the PO header ID is 0, it says add an order. Otherwise, we show the page title edit an order, but we're not populating either of those two models. So let's see how we could go about that. And the first thing is that the header is pretty straightforward. We can just drop in the order add edit, and it's going to await the PO header get one stored procedure, and we're passing in the PO header ID. So we can just try that. So I'll save everything and run it. Select it, edit it, and lo and behold, we've now got the order header from that order with the supplier, his address, the order number, order date, and who requested it, but still nothing here on the lines. Now for when we were the stored procedures that we've got available here are, at the moment, we've got PO line list. But the trouble with that is that it's going to get all the PO lines, and we only want the PO lines for the particular order header that we've got. So I think probably what we need is a new stored procedure, which we'll probably call PO line get by PO header. And we can probably use the existing PO line get one as a basis. So let's just script that as create to a new window. And what we want is the PO lines where the PO line header ID is the header ID that we're passing in. So let's call this, as I said, let's call it get by PO header. And instead of passing in the PO line ID, we're going to be passing in the PO header ID. And we're going to be selecting it where the PO line header ID is the PO header ID being passed in. I hope that makes sense. So what we're doing is getting all the records from the PO line table, where the PO line header ID is the PO header ID being passed in from the into the stored procedure. So let's parse that and execute it. So we should have a new stored procedure. PO header, sorry, PO line get by PO header. We now need to adjust the PO line service. So PO line service, and we need to add into here a service that looks like PO line list or PO line get one, but with the PO line get by PO header where we're passing in the PO header ID. So let's make a bit of space, and this is again to save you watching me type all this out. It's going to, so it's a kind of combination between the PO list and the get one, in that it's an IEnumerable PO line, but we're passing in the PO header ID, and it's going to be returning PO lines. So that's what we're doing here. But again, we need to add the interface now for PO line service. So in here, let's add it in here. So we're adding the task to the IEnumerable PO line get by PO header, and we're passing in the PO header ID. That should be. Let's just check, make sure I've got it correct on here. PO header. Yep, that looks okay. Back in the purchase order page, we've got the order add edit being populated. We need to now create order lines by PO header. Let me just create that first, or declare it first. We'll have that up here. Now, I'm now creating an IEnumerable, and I'm calling it order lines by PO header. And that is going to await that new get by PO header. But the problem we've got is that that is an IEnumerable, and the grid uses a list. So I'm having to change order. So I'm saying, first of all, I'm getting the IEnumerable and calling it order lines by PO header, and then I'm saying that the order lines is the order lines by PO header to list, and this converts it from an IEnumerable to a list. The last thing I'm doing here is saying that the supplier enabled is false. That's because the supplier in the drop-down list it defaults to enabled, but because we've got order lines there, I don't want the user to be able to change the supplier. So let's see how this looks. Well, it's getting there. So we've got the header, and the supplier is grayed out. We can't change that. But looking down here, We haven't got the product code, we haven't got the net price, and we haven't got the tax and therefore the total. So we need to see why that's causing us a problem. Let's cancel that and go back to the code and close it. Now the product code isn't being displayed because although the PO line model in the project, let's have a look at that. PO line model. We've got the product code here. It's in the model. So when we're adding purchase order lines, we're populating that, but it's not saved to the database. What is saved to the database is the product ID. So when we get the data back, we're getting the product ID back, but we're not getting the product line at the moment in the SQL stored procedure that we use to get it. So what we need to do is to modify the SQL stored procedure for get by PO header so that it brings back the product code, and we also need it to bring back the net price, the tax price, the tax amount, and the gross price. So let's have a look at the stored procedure to see if we can change that. So this is the stored procedure we've just created. Let's close that. I don't need it, and then we can have a look at it more easily. Right, so at the moment it's only getting the data from the PO line table, but we want the product code, and we also want a bit more information about net price, tax amount, and gross price. Now, as before, I'm going to take the lazy way of dealing with this, and I'm going to create a new view. And I'm just using this as a tool to create the select statement that I want. So I want PO line, and because I want the product code, I know that's on the product table, so I can select that as well and then close. Those are the two tables that are involved, and we need to create this join between them. So the product ID is joins with that, and I think we'll have it so that we always have all rows from the PO line. So if for some reason the product gets deleted, can't imagine why, then we've always got data that's valid. Right, so the fields we want are as before. We're going to want, let's just get back everything from the PO line table. And we want the product code. So that should be all okay. But what we also need is the PO line net price. And the way to do that is just to put some calculations in here. So what we want is to get the net price. It is PO line product quantity times PO line product unit price. So PO line and we're going to call that in the service we called it PO line net price. Let's just run that to see if it works. Yes, we're getting the net price back. The next thing we want is the tax amount, and I'm not sure. I don't think I can just take that and multiply it by the tax rate. So what I'm going to do is take what we've already got here, and I'm going to multiply it by that. That always catches me out. I don't know why it does that. Times PO line tax rate. And that, if we go back to, let's put a quote in there. I am very confused by that. And PO line tax amount. Let's make sure that works. Yep, that's working. And lastly, we want the PO line gross amount. So that's going to be it's actually the PO line quantity times the PO line unit price times 1 plus the tax rate. And it's all this lot first. So I've got to put brackets around it. And that should be, just make sure I get it right, PO line gross price. One more go to see if it works. Yes, it's doing that correctly. So that tells me that what we want is this bit of code here in place of the select statement that we had in here. So I can just simply change it up to there anyway. Don't include that where clause. That needs to be kept, retained. Right, so we'll execute that to change the stored procedure. Now if we go back and run our project, I'll just double check. It's forcing me to select one. If I select one, I can edit. I still haven't got the product code. I forgot that. Right, let's go quickly back and find out why I forgot that. Oh. Right, so I am bringing it back, but in the, I should call it as PO line product code. Because I'm calling it something different on the PO line model, I need to make sure that it matches it exactly. Right, let's execute that. Ah, no, I can put it straight in here. Actually, let's stop it running. Right, back to here, run it again. Select a row, click edit, and everything's there. So we've got the products with the product code, the unit price, the net price, the amount of tax, and the total 125.88. 125.88. So that looks fine. I'm going to call a halt to it there, because if I try changing something, say change that to 27A, if I try saving it, come back, edit, it's not actually saving it yet. So the saving of the order is going to be the subject of our next video. It is quite complicated, or it is more complicated than I'd hoped. Editing lines down here is going to present something of a challenge, because we can edit the existing rows, we could add new rows, or we could delete rows, and we need to think very carefully how we do that. So for this video, I think that's about it. Thank you very much for watching. If you've got any comments, please note them in the comments below. As usual, I'll put links to the code for this video and a description in the Blazor Code website. Thank you very much indeed for watching.